Good afternoon. Just gonna lag for a minute here and make sure that everybody's signed on. Coming, broadcasting on SoberNow.com's Facebook page. And if you haven't gotten over there yet and given it a like, please do so. Okay, looks like we're good to go. I'm Jim LaPierre. This is Sober Now. Today's topic is when you have to do that scary thing in recovery. Really open to your comments, your questions. Would love to hear from you. Always want to make the streams interactive. So when I think about facing fear in the course of recovery, I immediately think of the acronym for fear. A couple of definitions that I think most of us are familiar with. The first one is fuck everything and run, and the second one is face everything in recovery. What I've come to appreciate is that how we deal with fear really determines the lion's share of what's possible in our lives. And I think we have a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be brave, what the nature of courage is. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's being afraid and doing it anyway. And my experience is that it takes a lot of courage to have hope, particularly in trying times. I think too often, if you're like me, you see having hope as an invitation to disappointment. But I also love the acronym for HOPE. It stands for Hold On, Pain Ends, which I think is one of the most important lessons that we learn about pain and facing fears. But again, sometimes the things that we have to face in recovery are just overwhelming. They're things that we're not ready for. Sometimes they're things that nobody is ready for. And when I think about how do we commonly deal with fear, especially if we're in early recovery, we do avoidance. And the person that we avoid most, of course, is ourselves. We stay busy. We flood our lives with the needs, wants, and feelings of other people, places, and things so that we can avoid ourselves. We do script writing. Script writing, if you're not familiar, is like a playwright. You write out the characters that are in your life or involved in this situation. You decide how it's likely to unfold, and too often that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. One of the things that I notice about script writing is that there's never a happy ending to that story. There's always a horrible, horrible ending. And we tell ourselves that what we're doing is hoping for the best and preparing for the worst, which honestly, in my experience, is an impossibility. We can't do both simultaneously. I think when we tell ourselves that we're preparing, what we're most often doing is dreading. Dread is like experiencing pain before the pain arrives. It's all a huge mindfuck, but it's something that makes us feel like we have a measure of control, like we can anticipate how events are going to unfold. And intuitively, oftentimes we can. But when we're afraid, we often struggle to access our intuition. And so instead, we listen to our hearts and we draw on past experience, which gave us the expectation that things are going to unfold in the worst possible way. We certainly have a tendency to self-sabotage. We have a nasty habit of making our fears come true. The expression is that quite often we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. But what I've learned about people like me is that when we get tired of waiting for the shoe to drop, we start throwing shoes. We don't want to wait. We don't like living with unknowns. We struggle when we feel like we're in limbo. And too often we cover up our fear and our vulnerability with anger. And instead of reaching out, instead of doing what's healthy for us, we go back or we regress. We go back to old ways of doing things. And of course, we have a strong desire to numb those fears, to not express our needs or even necessarily to know what those are. So the kinds of fears that I was thinking about for today's stream are really, really super hard things. I watched a good friend, someone near and dear to me recently had to do something incredibly hard. And I won't go into the specifics of that. I'll just give some examples of what I've seen folks experience over the years. So, for example, someone who's maybe got a year clean from heroin, and now they're facing a major surgery, and there's just no way they're going to be able to get through that without pain medication. And obviously it's a healthy fear, but it's still an overwhelming one, because for a lot of us, pain medications are how we get started into addiction in the first place. Sometimes you have to take a job that really isn't conducive to your employment because the bills have to be paid and the baby needs to eat. And those are just some realities that I don't think they get talked about quite enough, but they're real world problems. Sometimes you have to go home back to your family of origin, maybe for a funeral, maybe somebody near and dear to you is terminal or is dying. To face those kind of things, especially in the first couple of years clean and sober, is overwhelming. I mean, potentially they're overwhelming at any point in recovery. And so I think the most important thing for me about fear is that I have to ensure that I'm not facing it alone. I have too much experience at that. I have too much of my life was spent preparing for the worst and isolating myself and concealing and hiding those fears from everybody. I have a great appreciation for folks who don't believe me when I say I'm fine, for folks who are tenacious and intuitive and just have a strong sense of what's going on with me and are willing to call me out on it. So again, I'd love to hear your experience. Hit me up with some comments. Let me know what your questions are. I was thinking about a couple of stories today. The first one was another young man who's very near and dear to me. The housing option that was presented to him when he was in early recovery was in a really drug-infested neighborhood, and his choice was to remain homeless or to take residence there. So he secured housing, but in order to go absolutely anywhere, he had to walk past a few drug houses, a few places where he knew that he could easily purchase his drug of choice. And we worked long and hard because he became progressively fearful of leaving his home. He knew that walking by those residences was just too much of a temptation. And I totally get it. And so we talked about 100 different ways that he could face that fear. And in each and every case, I was trying to convince him that he didn't need to do that alone. He had a really good support system. And so any number of people that he could be on the phone with or Facebook Messenger with or somehow, doing some video streaming and just having somebody virtually present while he was doing the thing that was scary. Especially in this time of pandemic, we don't necessarily have physical proximity to our loved ones and our support of others, but we can certainly maintain a virtual connection, and I would say that's 1,000,000 times better than having no connection at all. The other story I thought of was a gentleman in recovery that I'd worked with for a long time, and his fear was separating himself from people that he thought were good friends, and some of them were actually family members. They maintained active addiction while he was racking up sober time and kicking ass and really making positive changes in his life. And so he was always fearful of kind of being sucked back into those friendships, those family connections. And he had a really interesting twist develop in his life. Somehow a rumor got circulated that he had become a DEA informant. And he came to see me for a session one day, and he was just tied up in knots and mad as hell. And he couldn't believe that this was being said about him. And I was like, wait a minute. You want to break free of those relationships. You want to surround yourself with people who are in recovery and not people who are using drugs. What better way to get people who are using and dealing out of your life than to have them believe that you're undercover now for the DEA? So let's just run with that. Let's not negate it. Let's let people believe that. And if you can, even throw some fuel on that fire, because whatever works is my motto. So I want to talk about how we make some plans here that are realistic, because most of what we say we're planning for or preparing for is usually not healthy. But I'm going to pause just for a moment because I really want to answer your questions. Please let me know what's on your mind. How can I be helpful to you? Okay. Just checking a few feeds here real quick. Okay. Let's see. Sober Now's Facebook page and Choose Help's Facebook page are the easiest ways to pose your questions. Would love to hear what's on your mind. So, a couple of thoughts that I have whenever someone tells me they have to do something really hard. My first question is, can you take somebody with you? And again, that can be virtually or physically. Do you have people that are actively supportive of you? And what are you willing to ask of them? I think, especially when we're coming from a place of fear, we go back to feeling like we're an imposition, we're a burden. We tell ourselves that they already have too much on their plate. And without really meaning to, we end up making the decision for them about what their involvement will be or how much support we will be receiving. And I encourage folks to remember that it feels good to really come through for somebody you care about. And so we need to be open to allowing people to have that opportunity. And I'll ask them to consider, who's in your circle, who would want to be there for you. And again, my constant reminder is that it helps us to help you. I think by default, too often our plans are just kind of white knuckling our way through, holding our breath. It's one of the things that I noticed early on in supporting people in addiction recovery is that when we're trying not to feel something, we hold our breaths. And so your body is always giving you clues about how you're doing, how you're feeling, what your needs are. This is a great place to practice HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and get in touch with, sometimes it's hard to access exactly what your emotional experience is or to make sense of things, but you can always check in with your body and you can always practice things like HALT and also taking pause. I think when we're afraid, especially if we're not dealing with the real fear, fear very quickly becomes anxiety. Anxiety generalizes and spreads to all kinds of places. And our disease will use that. Our disease very much wants us to be afraid. I love the adage that my disease wants me dead, but it will settle for miserable. So too often I hear from folks that I have people who are there if I need them. And I'll say, okay, I have some really good news for you. You need them because you're like me. You need help on your and support and encouragement and accountability. You need all that stuff on a good day. And when things get especially rough, you need it all the more. So we can't afford to wait until we have a sense of desperation or until things are overwhelming. That's not what we want the people that we care about to do. That's not what we suggest to friends of ours. When you call on somebody, it's inherently and implicitly validating. It's saying to them, hey, you have something to offer. You are somebody that I respect and appreciate, and everything about that, I think, is counterintuitive in a sense, because when we, the excuse we most readily use is that they already have too much going on in their life. And I say, well, when you give them the opportunity to support you, you're giving them a break from their stuff and allowing them an opportunity to be of service, which is always beneficial. It's always healthy. It's always a solid plan. Relapse prevention plans are a huge part of early recovery, and they need to be modified when we have to do something that's especially hard. The example that I used earlier of someone who's in recovery from heroin addiction, involving someone else in a trusted other in holding or dispensing medication is a really healthy way to go about that. Having folks who will hold you accountable if they feel like maybe you're medicating stronger than you need to, maybe just observing that the possibility that your brain is telling you that you're in more pain than you're actually in. Using the absolute minimum amount of medication is certainly the way to go. And demanding that kind of accountability from our doctors and surgeons is a big deal. Um, it seems like it goes to one extreme or the other. Either doctors are really loath to prescribe medication at all to people who have a history of addiction, or they are careless and prescribe us too much. Almost 7 years ago, when I had a major surgery, my surgeons were willing to prescribe boatloads of opioids, and they became very frustrated with me when I said to them repeatedly, I want the minimum possible dose for the minimum possible amount of time. I have an extraordinarily addictive personality. I don't do anything in moderation, and I'm not going to do this. And the surgeons looked right at me and said, as long as you take what I prescribe in the way that it's prescribed, you can't possibly have a problem. And I went off on him and said, you have any idea how many people I've had in my office who got their start in addiction in exactly that way? So I think this underscores how difficult it is to trust ourselves. I mean, we struggle with that on a good day. And when we're afraid, the simple truth is fear fucks perception. Fear narrows the possibilities or the solutions that we're able to envision. It makes everything harder. And so the benefit of support, in addition to all of the beautiful things that we can receive in terms of encouragement and love, we can also get an outside perspective. We can get some objectivity. We can get some folks who are willing to call us out if they feel like we're being less than honest with ourselves. And that need is absolutely huge. So whatever you're facing in your recovery currently, I hope that you're talking about it, because alternatively, we overthink things. And the opportunity here is to use different parts of your brain to come at the same problem from different angles. When I talk about something, I'm using literally a different part of my brain than when I just think about it. When I write about the problem, I'm using yet another part of my brain. When I allow other people to have feedback, to give me feedback, and to provide what their experience was, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from each other. We can learn from people who have more lived experience, learn from people who have a maybe longer term or a stronger recovery. And we're also afforded the opportunity for a lot of spiritual growth. I've always been fond of the expression that pain is the touchstone for spiritual growth, and I know that that's true. I also know that fear is a catalyst and creates opportunities for spiritual growth. The expression that comes to mind is there are no atheists in foxholes. So I tend to seek my higher power when I have the greatest amount of awareness that I'm struggling, when I have the greatest awareness that things seem bleak or hopeless. There's a lot of things that help me to have peace in the midst of fear. The Serenity Prayer works really well for that. The Third Step Prayer from AA works really well for me. Pieces of the 23rd Psalm actually have brought me a lot of comfort. Specifically, the line is, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." I'm not a religious man, but I'm willing to practice a lot of eclecticism. I beg, borrow, and steal from any writing, any philosophy, any text that has things that I find useful. So just having the reminder that my higher power is with me always is, to me, what the 23rd Psalm is about, and knowing that I don't have to face things alone. Giving God people to work through is a huge part of what brings me peace. I joke with folks that I still don't get email from God. I still don't have billboards that are erected to show me the right way to go. So the God of my understanding works most readily through the people in my life. And when I surround myself with folks who are kindred spirits, who are seeking also to grow spiritually, then it's a lot easier to find my way. So I'm going to pause yet again and check the streams and feeds, but I also want to ask you to take a moment And again, head over to Sober Now's Facebook page, give that a like, because that'll give you notifications for upcoming streams and other content that we've created, weekly vlogs. And head over to YouTube and check out Sober Now's YouTube channel. Over 100 videos there now on different aspects of recovery from substance use disorder and aspects of overcoming trauma and mental health. All of that's completely free, pretty cool resource. And as always, I want to invite you to connect with me because I love hearing from you. I want to be a resource, so if you have questions or things that need answers, by all means, get a hold of me. Jim@sobernow.com is the easiest and quickest way to do that. And of course, check out the website, because for a limited time, we still have the option of a lifetime membership purchase for $99, lifetime of exclusive content and access to a 28-day program. We have two of them, one for recovery from substance use disorder and one for affected others, those of us who have loved ones in active addiction or maybe early recovery, coping, of course, with that because substance use disorder affects all of us. Okay, quick check. The Lions. Someday I'm going to get really good at this technology, and I won't have embarrassing things like an echo or a video feedback. Hi Christine, thank you so much for joining me. It's good to hear from you. It's been a while. Glad to hear that you're well, and thank you Melissa and Sarah for joining us. Going to be wrapping it up shortly. I'm thinking about the upcoming holidays and recognizing that, especially for people in recovery, those tend to be really hard for us. It's a time where I think too often we feel obligated to spend time with people we don't like. In upcoming streams, I'm going to be talking about getting through the holidays clean and sober. I'm going to be talking about seasonal affective disorder. This is the time of year where folks sometimes struggle with diminishing daylight, and let's talk about how that impacts your depression, your mood on a daily basis, and how it impacts your recovery. I hope that you will take excellent care of yourself and connect with loved ones. I hope you'll expand your circle because honestly, recovery is the most badass thing a person can possibly do with their lives, and you deserve to have a life that's second to none. So again, check out the YouTube channel, email me, jim@sobernow.com, and let me know how I can help. I'll look forward to talking to you next week. We join in Thursdays at noontime, so give the video a like, give it a share, bring some friends and family in, let's expand this conversation, and please take excellent care of you. Thank you.